Could this be the end of the road for South Africa's president? Lawmakers are set to vote on whether they've lost confidence in the country's embattled leader. I'm Shuli Ghosh, and today's newsmaker is Jacob Zuma. South Africa's president has proved remarkably resilient. Jacob Zuma has survived scandal after scandal and dodged allegations of corruption. But on Tuesday, lawmakers are holding a vote of no confidence. While Zuma's made it through several of these votes before, this ballot could be the one to unseat him. An influential group of members of Zuma's own party, the ruling ANC, is urging its parliamentarians to vote in favour of the motion. They say the future of the party depends on getting rid of him. It could also be the first ballot to be held in secret. That's something opposition members are hoping for, believing that will give them the numbers they need. So could this vote seal Zuma's fate? We begin our debate with this report from Shoaib Hassan.
He survived 4 previous attempts to unseat him as president. But this latest no-confidence vote appears to be the strongest test yet for Jacob Zuma. His opponents say his rule has fueled endemic corruption and economic mismanagement and must end.
When we speak about the rot, that's what we're pointing to. The country is rotten to a point where the law enforcement has been shut down, except that it deals with petty crimes of people who are stealing food in restaurants and shoplifters and all that. But the real things that is eating our country is not being dealt with, which is corruption.
That's a feeling that's united the opposition and led to calls for him to resign. It's also turning Zuma's own ANC political party against him.
I honestly think that the ANC mission has been hijacked. And specifically, I think the president has actually allowed that to happen because he is in the forefront if he's not the champion of that.
And now South Africa's Supreme Court has said that the no-confidence voting can be done in a secret ballot, allowing dissenting ANC MPs to vote against Zuma without fear of reprisal. Jacob Zuma's reign as President of the Republic of South Africa has been as colourful as it's been controversial. His election in 2009 saw him succeed ANC veteran Thabo Mbeki despite being accused of racketeering and corruption. Zuma won by a wide margin due to his working-class roots and his pro-union policies. That popularity is now beginning to fade away. A recent court ruling found he misappropriated state funds for his private residence. Zuma later acknowledged that such instances had increased.
The access to state power and resources has led to perceptions and allegations that the ANC is a corrupt organization.
The South African president may still survive the no-confidence vote as the ANC unites against the opposition. But that may only be so the party can itself dismiss him in December and try and regain the voters' respect before the 2019 elections. Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Johannesburg is ANC member Moswanele Manyi. He's also the president of the Progressive Professionals Forum, an online platform for South African workers. In Durban, we have Aisha Kaji. She's a political analyst and the former program director at the International Human Rights Exchange Program at the University of Witwatersrand. And joining us from the Eastern Province of Mpumalanga is Lebogang Ramafoko. She's the CEO of the Soul City Institute, an organisation that focuses on social justice for young women. A big thank you to all my guests for joining me. Moswanele, let's start with you because this isn't the first time Zuma has faced a vote of no confidence. It may not be the last. How likely is it that this motion will succeed?
No, this, like all other 7 other motions, it will fail dismally. because this motion is raised by a party that has got no majority in parliament. So it's just another, it's going to be the 8th time that this fails, because we're dealing with an arrogant party, a party that does not want to accept democracy.
Well, there is a difference this time round, isn't there? What's interesting about this vote is that ANC stalwarts, including Thabo and Becky, are calling on ANC members to vote against him.
I think what is important is for everyone to understand that the processes work in terms of structures of the ANC. The highest decision-making structure of the ANC, which is the NEC of the ANC, has already pronounced on this matter that they are not going to be pulled by the nose by the opposition and vote with the opposition to remove their own president, because the ANC is very clear on this matter that this is a very malicious vote. It's a vote that's meant not only to remove the president, but actually aimed at dislodging the entire ANC government. Because if this happens this way, what you're going to have, the entire cabinet must resign, ministers and deputy ministers and deputy president, everybody must go. That will collapse government. We do not think in South Africa, as things stand now, we should be throwing the country into more abyss, throwing the country into more turmoil.
Okay, let me put that to Aisha, because Mwanele makes the point that if this vote succeeds, the entire cabinet has to go. This would be catastrophic for South Africa. This is a malicious vote, and it's not going to succeed. What do you say?
Well, this administration, the Zuma administration, has been catastrophic for South Africa anyway. So, yes, it will throw the government into a bit of a panic. It will necessitate perhaps a new cabinet, perhaps even a call for a new election, etc. But given the degree of kleptocracy into which this administration has sunk, and given, as you've said, that senior members, both former members, the former president and current sitting MPs are calling for ANC members to support this vote of no confidence, it is clearly at a time when South Africa is at a breaking point. It's a point of turmoil. It's a point where ordinary citizens and indeed even politicians within the ruling party have become sick of what is going on within that party, within the senior structures and the senior leaders of that party. And therefore, there is a slight chance, Shuli, that this vote of no confidence may succeed. However, I, for one, think it won't, because we have a party whip system. Unfortunately, if people do vote with their consciences, we will find that they will be hounded out of their current positions, and they have, as ANC MP Makosi Khoza has noted, they will find that they have no way of then supporting their families and homes.
Yeah, let me put this to...
Unfortunately, people are unlikely to vote against the president.
Let me put this to Lebo, because...
also, of course, because it's been brought by the opposition.
This is a very interesting point, that at least 2 ANC members have said that they will, they've said openly that they will vote against President Zuma. They have received death threats. They have received threats of disciplinary action by the party. So, Lebo, in practice, unless it's a secret ballot, which is what the opposition is calling for, how easy will it be for ANC members to come out and vote against President Zuma?
I think it's going to be very difficult. I think the mood, not only with people who have spoken out, but in the country, there is clearly intimidation. I, for one, was a reluctant participant in this discussion, because we have seen with admissions of what happened with Paul Pottinger about how even social media was used to use very sensitive issues of transformation in the country to fuel a whole lot of discontent in the country. We have seen how the Black Land Fest has gone on rampage attacking journalists. So I think over and above the fact that there has been very overt messages that MPs should not be voting with the opposition, I think the mood of anyone who is speaking out is that they speak out at their own peril.
OK, let's have a listen to what opposition leader Julius Malema says. He says that there should be a secret vote to enable ANC leaders to vote against President Zuma.
I'm not talking to opposition MPs. I'm talking to ANC MPs. I've spoken to more than 60 of them. They've committed. They've asked that this thing must be secret. They will deliver it. They are not happy themselves. They are not happy themselves. So don't undermine the secret ballot.
Mwazanzele, if you're so confident that the vote is not going to go against President Zuma, why don't you have a secret ballot?
No, look, I think this vote will fail, this vote. What Julius Malema has said before. So it's a whole.
But is it going to fail because ANC members will feel intimidated about voting against President Zuma?
ANC members join ANC. I think what is important is that we have a very hypocritical approach here from opposition parties. And I'm coming to a question. The same DA, which is the main opposition party, has disciplined its own members for not voting the party line. The same Malema who's just spoken now, he himself has also is busy disciplining his own members in Mogale City for not voting his party line. This is because in South Africa, we have a party political system, we have a multi-party democracy in South Africa. We do not vote for individuals. We do not vote for the consciences of people. We do not get given the opportunity to do due diligence on the consciences of people. It cannot be that at this needing hour, we are now dependent on consciences which were not put to a stress test in the first place.
OK, you're saying that you don't vote on individuals. I just want to put to you that President Zuma is something of a liability for the ANC. I mean, look at the Gupta scandal. Look at the, the allegations of that he's linked with a family involved with racketeering, extortion, fraud, the millions of dollars he spent on doing up his own property. He sacked a popular finance minister. All of those things that he's done. Why is the ANC continuing to protect him?
No, this is a very simple answer to your question. South Africa is a constitutional democracy. When Zuma removes or appoints ministers, the Constitution gives him absolute powers to do that. There is nothing in the Constitution of South Africa that requires President Zuma to consult anyone. So when he removes or appoints ministers, it's his prerogative. So we cannot have a situation where the Constitution of the country is subjected to emotions of those that have lost elections. Cannot be. And as we speak here and now, President Zuma is not facing any corruption charges. As we speak here and now, the last time President Zuma was ever convicted was in 1963 by the apartheid regime. So here we're dealing with an innocent man. The Constitution of South Africa says everyone must be presumed innocent until proven guilty. President Zuma has not been proven guilty on anything except by the media and opposition and all the haters in South Africa. Those are the only people that have convicted him. But the law in South Africa
Let me put
has
that
not
to Aisha. President Zuma has not been convicted of anything. So why then should there be critics about his position as president and his abilities as a leader?
I wonder if Mr. Manye has actually heard of the Constitutional Court judgment of last May, when the Constitutional Court unanimously found that Mr. Zuma had indeed not been ethical in his expenditure on his home at Nkandla and needed to pay back the money, which of course has not been done to date. As you know, Shuli, people in positions of immense power often wield sufficient influence, both military and political and security-wise, where they're able to shut people up. And as Lebo has just pointed out, this has begun happening, unfortunately, in South Africa, where MPs with a conscience who have actually declared their dissatisfaction with the current administration have actually been assaulted, have been threatened. Journalists have been as well. So yes, we're living in a constitutional democracy, but unfortunately that constitutional democracy under this administration is not actually protecting all of its citizens.
The problem for the opposition, of course, is that President Zuma does still command huge support in some parts of South Africa, particularly in the rural areas where you are in KwaZulu-Natal. And that support for him is unwavering, and that is something that is problematic for the opposition.
Okay, thank you, Shuli. As I was saying, while there is enormous grassroots support, including in KwaZulu-Natal, for the party that brought liberation to this country, the ANC, that isn't necessarily the case for the person of the president. And even where it is largely dictated by politics that are, to an extent, based on patronage, based on favors given and received, etc. There is a huge network of corruption in this country, which is being exposed through things like the Guptagate emails, etc., that Mr. Manyi will not speak to because he knows that there really is no defensible position for the degree of kleptocracy into which the Zuma administration, the degree of corruption into which it has become embroiled. And of course, many of those close to the president will refuse to speak against him and against this corruption because they themselves are benefiting and their families and friends are benefiting from this. But it is time that people with conscience started to speak out against it.
Ms. Ranele, what do you have to say to that? And do keep it short because I want to move on to other issues.
Yeah, but can we just set the record straight? Firstly, I think Aisha is confusing the record, is continuing with this negative propaganda without facts. What are the facts? The facts are, when the Constitutional Court thing came into being, the Constitutional Court issue was about the powers of the public protector. At that time in the country, there was legal uncertainty. That matter was not legally settled. You had the Law Society of South Africa that had said public protector powers are not binding. You had the Western Cape High Court Judge Skeepers, who said the public protector powers are not binding. You had the former Constitutional Court Judge Yakub, who said the public protector is just like an ombuds.
Okay,
so
let's move on to some other issues. I do want to move on to some other issues of the problems of presidency. Everybody gets their chance to have.
You're not giving me enough chance.
You've had a lot of answers. You've had a lot of answers, and I want to move on to other areas. For example, for ordinary South Africans, the economy is a huge problem. The economy is a huge problem. Many would say that that's a failure of the South African government, and President Zuma has lost the support of the biggest trade union, COSATU. Lebo, you've criticised Zuma for his lack of action on social equality and women's rights. There are other things which South African people feel they've been disappointed by in the South African government.
Yes, civil society, the South African Council of Churches have all come out to speak about what corruption is and whether or not the president himself is basically guilty of corruption is neither here nor there. What is important is that he has not come out even today to speak about what is happening in the country, and he has not come out around the Gupta leaks. And I also think that it is disingenuous to say people believe because of propaganda. I think when 1 million people can sign petitions, when there can be so much outcry, I hope that we are also regarded as those who are critical as clever enough to make up our mind. It seems as if the argument that says this is propaganda and this is just the opposition fails to recognize that, in fact, intelligence is not preserved to the few. We are also intelligent to understand that this is not what we signed up for as a country.
So the million-dollar question is, can the opposition capitalise on this? Because the next election will be in 2019. Can the opposition make inroads into the ANC's dominance?
Can I just say this?
No,
for me, when we make this about political parties, we lose the debate. Yes, Mr. Manyi is correct. We've got a political system that at the moment favors the ANC. But the ANC has squandered its moral high ground. It has scored its own goals. We can be very technical about what will make the vote of no confidence win or not. But I think what all of these scandals have shown us is that democracy is not only about a vote. Civil society, and rightfully so, is being very vigilant. Because for every rand that is not spent properly in the country, we are not going to be able to achieve even the goals of the ANC. And I don't think anybody today can stand up and say, as we speak, the ANC is a united party. In fact, the ANC does not need an opposition government. The ANC does not need an opposition party. The ANC is in opposition.
Aisha, the Democratic Alliance says that it could win the next election if all the opposition parties banded together. I mean, really, is that a likely prospect?
No, it's not going to happen. And I actually think I need double the time because I've got two unpatriotic South Africans.
Very, very unlikely, unfortunately. The Democratic Alliance is actually tainted by its history. You know, its history is still rooted, unfortunately, in our apartheid past, and the EFF is not yet strong enough to challenge the ANC as a major opposition party. The likelihood of the two getting together, as they have tried to work in certain metros after the last local government elections, the likelihood of them forming a real alliance for the national elections is really very, very slim indeed, because their political ideologies are so far apart in terms of economic policy particularly.
OK, we are going to have to leave it there, but that was a fascinating debate. Thank you very much indeed to all my guests, Mzwanele Manyi, Aisha Kaji and Lebegon Ramaphosa. Thank you. Still to come, Saudi Arabia tries to get 25 US lawsuits thrown out over its alleged support for the 9/11 attacks. And Al Jazeera under attack again. Israel moves to ban the broadcaster, accusing it of supporting terrorism. Welcome back to the Newsmakers. Now, the terror attacks on September the 11th, 2001 were the deadliest on US soil. The finger of blame has long pointed at Saudi Arabia, where 15 of the 19 plane hijackers were from. Representatives of the thousands of victims have filed 25 lawsuits against the Gulf nation for its alleged role in the plot. But now Saudi Arabia has asked a US judge to throw them out. Yvette McCullough reports.
The deadliest terror attacks on US soil in modern history, leaving lasting wounds for those who survived and for the families of those who didn't. Hundreds of victims' families, injured survivors, along with insurance companies and businesses, are suing those they think are responsible, including the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They claim the Saudi government directly and knowingly assisted the attack's airplane hijackers and fueled al-Qaeda's rise by funding charities that supported them. But Saudi Arabia says there is no evidence of that, and it has now asked the Manhattan Federal Court to drop the 25 lawsuits against it. The finger has long been pointed at Saudi Arabia, where 15 of the 19 hijackers came from. In 2004, the 9/11 Commission report found there was no evidence that the Saudi government as an institution or senior Saudi officials individually funded the attacks. But it also noted the likelihood that Saudi government-sponsored charities did. These 28 pages raised further suspicion. Part of a 2002 investigation report, they were classified by then US President George W. Bush.
The 9/11 attacks.
Last year, the Obama administration declassified them. They showed that some of the hijackers were in contact with and received support or assistance from individuals who may be connected to the Saudi government. It wasn't exactly a smoking gun, and both the US and Saudi welcomed the page's release.
The CIA director, the director of national intelligence, came out and said that there is no involvement of the Saudi government or Saudi officials in the events of 9/11. The Senate Intelligence Committee did its own investigation, came to the same conclusion, and so the matter is now finished.
But those suing say these 28 pages provide further evidence, although circumstantial. Saudi has been ruled out as a defendant in this case once before. In 2015, US District Judge George Daniels dismissed the case, saying he did not have jurisdiction over a sovereign nation. But last year, Congress passed new legislation allowing families to have their day in court. The Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act allows US citizens to take legal action against any foreign country for alleged involvement in terrorist attacks on US soil. President Barack Obama vetoed the bill, citing concern that it could open the US up to lawsuits against its intelligence and military actions abroad. But Congress voted overwhelmingly to override his veto.
The bill is passed.
Saudi Arabia is once again arguing that it should have sovereign immunity. There's long been speculation of Saudi involvement in supporting and funding terrorism, as well as criticism of it spreading its ultra-conservative brand of Islam, Wahhabism, around the world. But Saudi Arabia vehemently denies this, saying it too is a victim of such terrorism, and that it is taking every measure to try root out and bankrupt terrorist organisations. But many 9/11 families and survivors still believe one of the US's closest allies was behind the attacks, and is still hoping for their day in court. Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Lee Smith. He's a senior fellow at the think tank, the Hudson Institute, and in New Jersey. Terry Estrada, she's the national chairperson for the 9/11 victims group, Families and Survivors United for Justice Against Terrorism. Thank you to both my guests for joining us. Lee, let me start with you, because the Saudi position is that there is no evidence that the state was involved in any way with the 9/11 attacks, and that's why the lawsuits should be withdrawn. What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that that's what the 9/11 Commission has concluded. I think that the supporting claims based otherwise were on the redacted or classified 28 pages, and I don't think that the classified and now redacted 28 pages support the claims that the Saudis are responsible, or there's official Saudi responsibility for 9/11.
Well, the Saudis have also claimed sovereign immunity, which seems a bit odd to me. Why would you claim immunity if there's no case to answer?
Well, I mean, this is a principle of international diplomacy going back several hundred years. I mean, this is also one of the reasons why we have different arguments about this in Washington, because it could lead to trouble for Americans around the world, especially American troops around the world. So that's not just a Saudi argument. That's the argument a lot of people are making. I know that the Europeans are making this argument as well. Everyone is concerned about the precedent that might set.
Okay, Terry, the Saudis have asked for the lawsuits to be thrown out. What is the victims, your clients' response to this?
That it's absolutely ludicrous, that there is an abundance of evidence that leads to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia financing Al-Qaeda, financing Osama bin Laden, and financing the charities that also supported Osama bin Laden and the attacks of 9/11. So they are not entitled to immunity. No one is entitled to immunity for a terrorist attack on American soil. And we enacted the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, JASTA, to clarify our existing law to then allow us to go forward with our lawsuit and hold the Saudis accountable for the role that they played in murder.
We're going to discuss JASTA in just a little minute, but I just wanted to ask you this. A lot of the evidence is circumstantial, as Lee says. The 9/11 Commission found no conclusive evidence that senior Saudi officials were complicit in the attack. So you don't actually have a smoking gun, do you, Terry?
We don't need a smoking gun. We have evidence. And Lee doesn't know what he's talking about because he hasn't seen the evidence that we are going to present into a courtroom as soon as the lawsuit goes forward. People can think whatever they want, but the reality is there is evidence that shows that the Saudis financed al-Qaeda, financed Osama bin Laden, and financed the charities that then financed these attacks on American soil.
Lee, we know that 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudis. They've met with Saudis.
Right.
What I'm saying is, you know, that there is evidence, as Terry says. Why shouldn't this evidence be debated in court? Why should it be thrown out before it gets to court?
No, wait a second. There is certainly evidence. We know for a fact that 15 of the 19 hijackers were Saudi nationals. That there's no debate over that. And if Terry says there's evidence, I'd be happy to change my opinion. I think that people should see the evidence then. I mean, what is the evidence?
Well, one of the things that that Terry's group have been looking at are these 28 pages which were missing from the original commission report, which have been declassified. Terry, tell us. Let me just ask Terry first, just for the benefit of our viewers. Okay. How does this change? How does this change the evidence of further possible ties between the Saudi Arabian government and al-Qaeda or those hijackers?
Right. Okay. So the 28 pages show a direct link from money that was being exchanged from the embassy in Washington, D.C. through out to the two of the hijackers that were in California. So there is a direct link of money being transferred through the embassy to these hijackers. And what these 28 pages reveal to us is not only is there a direct link to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, its agents of the Saudi Arabian government, but so that the investigation was never fully investigated and needs to now come into a courtroom so that the evidence that's been collected, and it's not just the 28 pages, there's a lot more than that, can be seen by the light of day in a courtroom.
So, Lee, I mean, clearly the Saudi Arabian position is that this new evidence is simply hearsay and speculation.
First of all, let me make one point. I mean, I was raised in New York City. I was in New York City the morning of 9/11. I walked around my neighborhood in Brooklyn with the ashes of my neighbors. So I'm certainly sympathetic to the cause of 9/11 victims. What happened, I mean, certainly people who lost loved ones, who lost friends, who lost colleagues. I mean, the tragedy that they suffered that day is much worse than anything anyone can imagine, but I'm extremely sympathetic. I, however, don't believe that because of the tragedy that Americans suffered, especially in New York and here in Washington at the Pentagon, I'm sorry, I mean, if what Terry says is true, then this is surely explosive news that money was wired from the Saudi embassy to the hijackers. I mean, I'm sorry, then why haven't people known this evidence before? So Terry saved this evidence, and now it's being revealed here on TRT World. I mean, I find it somewhat implausible. And frankly, I find it not a positive development. Look, the premise of the 28 pages has been what? That these 28 pages were redacted or that they were held off because somehow the United States government, the Bush administration, Bush principals, and the intelligence community were all involved in a widespread conspiracy to conceal the fact that a sovereign nation, Saudi Arabia, an American ally, had plotted and conspired to kill Americans on the streets on 9/11. I'm sorry, I find that really implausible.
Possible ties between al-Qaeda and the Saudi embassy in the U.S. They look at a former Saudi diplomat.
Which are what?
A former Saudi diplomat, Fahad al-Thumairy, who made 21 phone calls to another Saudi who was in the hijacker support network. I mean, that's pretty telling evidence, isn't it?
The 9/11 I believe the 9/11 Commission also found it inconclusive. If there's more, everyone would like to know. Everyone would be happy to see it and would like to know.
But no one's going to know if the cases get thrown out of court. Terry, how important is it that this case is actually heard? I mean, for the victims as well, because clearly they want some form of closure.
Yes, it's extremely important to the families to have accountability and justice for the murder of our loved ones, but it's also extremely important to our national security going forward. We cannot protect ourselves if we do not face who the real enemy is, who finances al-Qaeda, who finances these terrorist attacks. We need to stem the flow of money going to these organizations that vow to continue to kill and destroy us. And if it's Saudi Arabia, then let's get it out into the courtroom and let's see what we have. You're right. We don't know everything, so why do they keep blocking it? Why do they spend millions and millions of dollars trying to block this lawsuit? If they have nothing to hide, they should welcome an opportunity to tell their side in a courtroom. That's what we have asked for. We are American citizens. It's what we are entitled to. And anybody that thinks we're not entitled to that, I don't know on what planet you think I'm not entitled to justice for the murder of my loved one.
Let me ask you about JASTA, Lee, because this is the legislation that was passed in 2015.
No, excuse me.
Now, I want to bring up this point about national security, because the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act, some critics of that, or a lot of critics of that, Lee, say that that undermines the US's national security because it opens up US officials to being charged and tried on foreign soil.
Right, this was the point that I was making before, right.
Yes.
This was the point that I was making before. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I do want to come back to the idea of court cases. Look, if there is evidence of whether it's Saudi involvement, if there's evidence of a conspiracy that was engineered at the highest levels of the United States government, this can certainly come out through other ways. It doesn't necessarily have to come out through trials. Again, why hasn't this been reported in the press? Why aren't Terry and others
you're not disputing
providing
the wider evidence that Saudi
to be shown elsewhere?
Saudi Arabia is alleged to fund extremists, and there has been a lot of evidence on that. The Council on Foreign Relations says individuals and charities based in Saudi Arabia have been the most important source of funds for al-Qaeda.
We certainly know that charities and individuals have been an enormous problem.
Yeah,
I believe that
a U.S.
problem
Treasury
has been,
report of 2003.
Lessened, but
Saudi Arabia is the
problem.
epicenter for the financing of al-Qaeda. The Brookings Institution, since 1975, the Saudis have spent an estimated $70 billion to spread Wahhabism. So, given that wealth of evidence linking Saudi Arabia to the funding of extremism beyond its borders, why can't this court case go ahead on that kind of good faith?
Right, and
because you're talking about the different.
Sorry, let Terry answer that question.
Well, I haven't said anything about a conspiracy at the highest levels of our government. Those words keep coming out of your mouth, not mine. What I am saying
because
is
that's what the idea of the 28 pages presupposes. The idea that these have not been shown presupposes a conspiracy. The 28 pages were classified and redacted because it revealed sources and methods of American collection, of the American intelligence community. Those are very highly prized and dearly held onto secrets. That's why they were held. They weren't held because there's some secret evidence here proving the Saudi government was killing Americans on the streets of American cities 16 years ago.
The point is, all of this is now out in the open, so why can't it be debated in court? What is the big problem with going to court with this? What effect do you think it's going to have?
I don't see why we can't have the debate before we go to court. Where is the evidence?
Okay, let me ask Terry.
Should we go to court every time?
Let me ask, why go to court with this, Terry? It's not going to bring anyone back. It's unlikely that Saudi is going to face any huge sanctions because of this. So why are you pushing for lawsuits?
Well, I'm not going to assume anything, that there wouldn't be sanctions or some type of punishment if we take them to a court and we to find them guilty. I can't really say what the outcome would be, but why it's so important is because it's the truth. It's the truth about who financed the terrorist attacks on 9/11 needs to be told. We can't protect ourselves if we don't hold the financiers accountable. And for 16 years now, nearly 16 years, we don't have the full truth. You want to debate it. It's been debated, and nobody gets to the final truth of the matter. And that is, if the Saudi government financed the charities and financed Osama bin Laden, and are responsible for these terrorist attacks on our soil, they need to be held accountable.
Terry, there's also evidence that Iran may have been involved in 9/11. Are you going to sue them as well?
Those, that's a possibility right now, because the evidence that we've collected, the abundance of evidence that we've collected, leads to Saudi Arabia. They are the primary source. And that is why we filed this lawsuit over a decade ago.
Okay,
because of the evidence.
Can you answer this criticism about JASTA being contrary to US interests in other countries? Lee has made that point. Many people have made that point. What do you say about that?
Well, Lee and everyone else is absolutely wrong that it could possibly threaten our military or our diplomats or individuals.
Why are they wrong? Why are they wrong? The US has set a precedent.
Because JASTA made an amendment to the Foreign Sovereignty Immunity Act, and that's a foreign nation. All JASTA does is give us the ability to hold a nation accountable for the actions that then led to the terrorist attack on U.S. soil. It has nothing to do with individuals. Our Army, our military people are protected, their status of forces agreements. Our diplomats are protected, the Vienna Convention. Our contractors are protected. This isn't about individuals. You can't hold an individual accountable because of JASTA. It only made an amendment to the Foreign Sovereignty Immunity Act. He knows that. Everybody knows that. They just like to throw this other stuff around to make people, think, oh my God, JASTA is something bad. It isn't. It's very good policy to hold a nation accountable that finances the attacks that murders Americans on American soil.
Okay, Lee,
that's why
President Obama tried to veto JASTA. President Trump was very critical of that position. But there are obviously signs that President Trump is trying to now leverage a closer relationship with Saudi Arabia in the Gulf region. Do you think President Trump is backing away from his support for JASTA?
Yeah, I think he's probably backing away from it. I mean, because as you said, they seem to be trying. The Trump administration seems to be trying to renew ties with our many of our Gulf allies, Saudi Arabia chief among them. I'm sorry, I just want to say that I'm speaking as a member of the press. I'm a senior editor at the Weekly Standard, and again, I just have to say what we've seen happen in the press. The reporting on JASTA, the reporting on the 28 pages, I just think is disastrous. And so Terry can talk about truth as much as she wants, but the fact is, without evidence, what is truth based on?
Okay.
We have seen no evidence that makes her case. Please feel free to show the evidence. There are thousands, millions of people who would like to see the evidence. It's not there.
Right, guys, we are running out of time. I just want to ask Terry very quickly, when are you going to know whether your lawsuits are going ahead?
October 2nd is when we need to file our response to their dismissal. But if you also read in the press all of the positive things about JASTA, then you would know more. You would be able to come out here and be more honest about what it does and doesn't do.
Okay, clearly a lot of strongly contradicting views there. Thank you very much indeed, both of you. Good to have you with us, Lee Smith and Terry Estrada.
Thank you.
We have identified media outlets that do not serve freedom of speech, but endanger the security of Israel's citizens. And the main instrument has been Al Jazeera, which actually caused us to lose the best of our sons and actually incited.
Israel has joined Gulf states in moving towards shutting down Al Jazeera. The government's pushing to end the Qatari channel's operations in the country over accusations the network supports terrorism. The decision involves revoking the press credentials of Al Jazeera journalists and cutting broadcasts from local cable providers. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has accused the channel of inciting violence through its coverage of security developments around Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque. But the network says it's an attack on free and fair media, and the broadcaster questioned Israel's policy towards press freedom. Well, to discuss this further, I'm joined now by Professor Yossi Meckelberg. He's the head of International Relations, Social Sciences and Law at Regent's University, London. Good to have you with us, Yossi. So this is an interesting step by Israel. It doesn't normally back plans by Sunni Arab states. Why is it moving against Al Jazeera?
Well, I think we should start with the principle. Every democracy needs freedom of speech, and there is no freedom of speech if there is no freedom of press. And I think this has to be enshrined in any democracy. Now, I think Israel is looking what happens in the region and think in this realignment within the region, attacking Al Jazeera. It's rather convenient at this point in time. let alone when the Prime Minister is in quite few personal problems and has to deal with police investigation. This is one of the easiest ways to gain some political points. But at the end of the day, Al Jazeera is not Israel's main problem. Israel has way bigger problems to resolve, and this is just a distraction. What happened in Jerusalem 2-3 weeks ago didn't happen between Al Jazeera. Maybe some of the way that Al Jazeera portrays it doesn't necessarily help. I think every press organization, outlet should be responsible, the same way that government should be responsible, but Al Jazeera didn't create it.
But it's the accusations, I was going to say, it's the accusations that the Israeli government are making which are particularly hitting Al Jazeera hard. The communications minister, Ayub Kara, says it's because of Al Jazeera's coverage of the protests at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and Al Jazeera is guilty of incitement. Al Jazeera, of course, would say that it covered these protests in an unbiased way. And Al Jazeera, you know, let's be fair, weren't the only news outlet covering those protests that happened. BBC was there, CNN was there, Israeli journalists was there, and Israeli journalists are also saying that, you know, they've been restricted from doing their jobs by the Israeli military.
Yeah, and that's actually my argument. You see, this government has a history of trying to restrict freedom of speech, attacking free press. All in all, Israel is a free country and the press is doing quite well, but under constant attack. As you mentioned, the other media outlet, the BBC is under constant attack and criticism from Israel. Other, you know, France 24, everyone that criticized the Israeli government is actually attacked by the Israeli government, including the Israeli media. Actually, the Israeli media, the Israeli official TV went under complete reconstruction because Mr. Netanyahu didn't like the way that he was portrayed there. I think, you know, Al Jazeera is the easiest target in this sense because it's not that liked in other parts of the Middle East. It's under attack there. Obviously, it criticizes Israel quite severely, but I think more than anything else, this is a noise that the Israeli government is trying to distract from other issues. The problem of what happened in Jerusalem has very little to do with Al Jazeera. It has to do with the occupation, and it has to do with not resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I'll just give you a small example. 5 years ago, the Israeli government closed a peace radio, All for Peace radio, just because it broadcast from the Palestinian territories inside Israel, though it was all about peace. And the people that founded it, a 6 months arrest warrant was put on them in case they broadcast again inside Israel.
So how does Israel call itself the only democracy in the Middle East then? If this is now government strategy to rein in the free media, how does it call itself a democracy?
Well, I think in relative terms, Israel has more free speech and free press than most other countries in the region. But I don't know, it's not a comparative thing. I think freedom of speech is something sacred in a democracy. And if you try to limit access of journalists, what they report, I think here and there you have journalists that not necessarily behave responsibly. I accept it. And I think there is a way to rebuke, there is a way to present a counterpoint. It's a democracy of sort, but it's definitely not what people like me that work with the media, write in the media, would like to see.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was looking at the organisation Freedom House, which grades countries' press freedom. Last year, it downgraded Israel's press freedom from free to partly free because of military censorship and gag orders. Is Israel not worried about how allies, the US, for example, which puts such great store by freedom of speech, how they're going to react? Does it affect relations with the rest of the world?
Well, it's interesting you raised the issue of the United States. The media is under attack in the United States right now. It's enough to listen to
that's a very good point, actually.
And the people around him. So maybe, you know, Donald Trump found his soulmate in Jerusalem right now. in thinking all the problems of the world, the media. You know, it's not new in history. It's instead of dealing with the issue, you try to kill the messenger, so to speak. Luckily, not physically, but figuratively speaking. Yes, the media is under attack, and I think the media should, you know, reassert itself. Sometimes also reflect. When the media does things that it shouldn't, I think there should be a reflection and understanding where they could do better. But at the same time, it's for the public that wants free speech. It is from the media that should stand on the back feet and say, we are there to provide the service, we are there for democracy, and without us, democracy would collapse. But, you know, it's not only the United States and not only Israel. There are other places that I'm sure you know very well, that there are attacks on the media and journalists are arrested, and their freedom of speech is very much constrained.
Yeah,
and I think this is a time to fight back.
You're right. It's an industry very much under pressure. Yossi, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Yossi Mecklenburg there.
My pleasure. Thank you.
That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Shuli Ghosh. Next time we discuss why artificial intelligence gave Facebook a scare. Until then, thanks for watching. Bye-bye.